Okay, in this video we'll look at the new product development process for international marketing. Basically, we start with a question of what's our overall product mix. Okay, so obviously we've got a successful home country mix of products. We are successful, so we want to expand. So our first question is, which products do we bring along, and in what way do we need to modify them, either for legal reasons or for packaging or language reasons, etc. In regards to our existing products, again, obviously we have the continued choice between standardizing and customizing. So obviously, if you look at standardized down the bottom, it's very much an inward-looking thing in terms of, this would be easy, cost-effective, similar systems, logistics, etc. Okay, so it's more of a financial viewpoint in some regard. Obviously quite important if you're going to build a global brand, and Apple is mentioned near the bottom. Now, when we use the word standardization, it does not necessarily mean completely identical. It means they're just very similar. Typically we have to adjust and adapt the products to some extent, obviously for language barriers in a lot of situations. So basically we've got to think of standardize and adapting as a continuous scale. We may choose to adapt some and keep the others similar, but just tweaking or minor changes to the product is considered standardization. Okay, so in terms of why we would customize, again, we look down the bottom where we see it's an outward-looking thing, where we're looking about what is best for the marketplace and customers. So marketplace, we're looking at obviously various segments, but we're also looking at competitors. What are they offering? Can we be better off in terms of competition by being a little bit different to our home country? We also need to think about the channels and the retailers and our partners in the international markets. What are they looking to have? Okay, so basically there's a trade-off. At one scale, standardizing means we have a much lower cost structure, far more economical, and basically, it may not sell as well, so we've got a lower turnover because it's not as ideally matched to the local market, but we should have a higher margin simply because we have a lower cost structure. Customizing down the bottom here is we are a better fit to the local market, but our margin is going to be lower because per unit cost is going to be a lot higher because we're producing products for one market, which is probably going to be a lot smaller. So what we're relying upon is greater sales volumes to make that profitable for us. Okay, so this is in the textbook. It's a trade-off between to what extent do we adapt the product up the top here, and then down the left-hand side, same thing with the communication. Extension simply means we're extending what we already have. Okay, adaptation is we're adapting what we already have, and new is obviously something completely new for the marketplace. So we've got to make that decision about both product and communication / positioning. So the first simplest box is the dual extension. If we go back up here, is option 1, extending simply what we do. No real change. And the beauty of this is it's a very simple starting point. Allows a company to test the market, see what happens. The downside, of course, is it may or may not be a good match to the local market. We may get lucky, but in reality, there are some limitations in terms of being able to do that, other than them being very similar countries or regions, which is not always likely. Right at the opposite side was product invention, where we just start from scratch. It's a new market. Let's start from the beginning. In reality, if you were in a domestic marketing situation and you were looking at a new segment or a new part of the market somehow, you would probably do this. You go, okay, gee, what are their needs? How do we meet their needs? What products do we need? How do we communicate to this market? So it's not dissimilar to the overall approach to marketing overall. In the middle is when we were deciding to extend one and adapt the other and vice versa, or perhaps adapt both products and communications. Look, in reality, we are probably going to do this most of the time. There's a few examples here. The one for the Mac versus the PC. This was an ongoing campaign in America for many years, and basically it was a product personality thing. Here's the Apple guy, here's the IBM PC guy, and they would banter, and it would be always the Apple guy who sort of got the upper hand, and this guy looked a bit embarrassed. But when they went into Japan, because of the cultural differences, it's not seen as polite or respectful to make fun of your competitor, even though they may be what you're trying to demonstrate. You're trying to demonstrate that your product's better, so they're inferior. This did not work well in Japan, so they did try it, but they had to adapt it later on. Another example is Pepsi Next when they entered the Australian market. Now, this is from the Australian side. As you can see, what is the difference between Pepsi Next and in Australia and in the USA? So the formula was different. So again, it was seen as a different market, possibly at different stages of health awareness. In Australia, they used the natural sweetener called stevia. And another example is when Dove, which is worldwide, has had a real beauty type message, and trying to convince women or demonstrate to women they are more beautiful than they see themselves, or you don't have to be this stereotype, Hollywood celebrity to be seen as beautiful. However, this message didn't resonate as well in the Chinese market, where the Chinese women were more likely to look at the role models. So in China, Dove had to modify their approach, and there's a little bit of a news read about that. Okay, when we talk about new products or entering a new market, one of the big challenges is diffusion, which is the speed of the product adoption. Basically, there's various, pretty well standard product factors listed at the bottom, which is in most marketing textbooks. I've got the example there of microwave ovens. Microwave ovens were first commercialized in the United States in the mid-1960s. However, it wasn't until the early 80s, so we're talking 15 to 20 years, before there was any significant take-up of that technology, and there was a significant reluctance to accept it, embrace it, etc. So basically, speed of diffusion relies upon the products being seen as having significant product advantages, but also it requires a change in consumer behavior and lifestyle. Now, this will vary by country. Okay, in some countries you'll have an attitude or a culture where the country is more individualized and people are willing to try things. So companies try to target early adopters. So here's a list of, other than product, factors that influence the speed of product diffusion internationally. We've got the degree of diversity of population. So a country like Japan is relatively similar in terms of their overall culture, but you could have countries such as South Africa where you've got very distinctive groups. Okay, the next two are cultural factors, degree of individualism, and obviously that attracts willingness to try something. and degree of uncertainty avoidance. So obviously new products in those cultures are less adopted less quickly. Overall population mobility. To what extent does the population get around, move around, and see other products? If you're in a situation where it's a fairly regional type country, or there's inability to travel, less cars and transport, then people tend to stay in their own areas and don't observe what happens somewhere else. Like in the old days, if we go back a couple of 100 years, it took the population to take a train trip to somewhere special, such as London or San Francisco or New York, to see what was happening in the city. And once they would see that, then that would spread back to other parts of the country. So that will vary. Percentage of women in the workforce. Okay, that's for various home products. So in countries where both partners work, time is an issue, etc. So you've got a whole array of convenience products required. In other countries where the wife is primarily at home, then there's less need for very much like the microwave and various time-saving type products. Disposable income levels. Obviously, as we move down income, such as the base of the pyramid, we've got a big risk in buying a new product. It's a big trial, so that reduces it. Word of mouth, that's pretty straightforward. And we also have a thing called a lead or a lag country. Just as we have individual consumers who are more likely to be innovators and early adopters, there are also the same thing apply for in a business market, a B2B, and the same thing applies for a country market as well. So this is a simple way of thinking about the two cultures. The blue is like a developed, individualized culture where you've got more innovators, more early adopters, so a new product will diffuse faster, as you can see. However, a collective society will be much slower rate of diffusion, but once it becomes the social norm to have that product, then we have a fairly rapid adoption of the product. Okay, let's have a look at the new product development process. I'm only going to be looking at the unique aspects of it. Obviously, there's a standard process in most marketing textbooks, but here I just want to concentrate on some unique points. First thing we're going to talk about is idea generation. So I've got key to future profits is new product based, and I've got an example there of 3M, a very large international company that really works hard at trying to replace its own product base. Certainly Apple, when Steve Jobs was around, had that mentality of if we don't cannibalize our products, somebody else will. So internal competition, that's seen as important. Okay, so down the bottom here, we have, you've got regional experiences that you can draw upon because you're operating in multiple areas and in multiple situations. You're probably going to have a lot more information coming through. You're probably going to have more R&D people, and you're going to have a lot more access to customers, consultants, suppliers, retailers, etc. The only downside of all that is, of course, that you've got the politics, as in, who wants to be seen as the initiator, and every management team wants to have, claims to have brought a new product to market that was adopted throughout the world. So you've got this competitiveness thing happening internally. Okay, screening is a very quick decision of go or no go with the product. It's a fairly common approach, but as we've covered before, we can look at some sort of scoring model, which is pretty standard for all new products. But from an international perspective, we've also got to be thinking about, is this a product we can leverage across global segments? So what's the sales scope of it? To what extent would we have to adapt it? Okay, so obviously that's going to be a major consideration. Can we find suppliers and logistics teams throughout where we're operating? So the next issue to consider is test marketing. There are obviously various ways of doing market testing, but the beauty of being an international marketer is we have opportunities to test it in multiple countries. Usually we have a success in one product in one country and we're rolling it out somewhere else. So a lot of what we're doing is automatically tested, and we obviously try and play around possibly with smaller markets with the marketing mix elements, see if we can improve it, etc. And down near the bottom, as you can see, it says that market testing is becoming far more a common practice in today's marketing world. And then finally, the last issue to consider is how we enter. Do we do it progressively, which is called a waterfall entry? So we do one step at a time. If you look at the image, it sort of steps down, next market, then next market, then next market. Or do we do a sprinkler, trying to hit everything at once, as fast as we can? Basically, a sprinkler, we see that with the large global brands that want to reach a lot of markets where there's a lot of hype. The slower approach is when there's going to be a long market. So microwaves, it's going to take years to take off. There's no point rushing out into every marketplace, etc. Where new technology is unlikely. So technology companies usually try to move pretty quickly because their product's life cycle might be only 3 or 4 years before they're replaced through more advanced technology. So if we don't have that, this is a food product or a simpler product, we can relax. If down in the middle there, if there's a fair bit of product adaptation required each time we hit a new market, obviously that's going to slow us down, etc. And if it's just something minor, well, there's no rush to the whole thing. Okay, so that's the new products section.